The city did not fall in a single night. It decayed slowly, like a body fighting an infection it could not understand. Sirens once screamed warnings that people trusted, streets once flooded with headlights and voices, and skyscrapers once reflected the confidence of a civilization that believed itself untouchable. Then the rules changed. The dead refused to stay dead. Hunger replaced reason. Fear became law. By the time the sun stopped rising over clean streets, the city was already lost. This was not an apocalypse born of explosions or instant extinction. It was quieter, more terrifying. A sickness that turned neighbors into predators, workers into shadows, and hope into a dangerous illusion. Entire districts were abandoned not because they were destroyed, but because survival itself had retreated. The undead moved without purpose, yet with relentless persistence, drawn by sound, movement, and the scent of the living. Humanity discovered too late that intelligence was no longer the strongest force in the city. Deep beneath the fractured streets, far from the collapsing towers and broken subways, something ancient stirred. The city had been built over old foundations, forgotten zones, and sealed-off caverns where history and myth were buried together. The concrete above trembled as something far older than civilization shifted in its sleep. Ping Kong did not awaken to save the city. He awakened because the city had violated a balance it never understood. Kong rose not as a hero, but as a force of nature answering chaos with dominance. His massive form emerged through shattered infrastructure, concrete and steel breaking like brittle bones against his skin. The undead swarmed instinctively, their minds too broken to recognize fear. They climbed, clawed, and fell in waves against him, their numbers meaningless against raw scale. Each step Kong took rewrote the terrain. Streets collapsed into craters, vehicles were crushed into scrap, buildings cracked under the pressure of his presence. Yet Kong was not untouched by the city's suffering. The noise, the decay, the endless movement of unnatural life irritated him. This was not a world he recognized. This was not prey behaving as prey should. Zombies did not flee. They did not submit. They simply continued. And for the first time since his rise, Kong felt resistance not from strength, but from endless persistence. Far below, in the shadowed corridors of what remained of the city's underground, another survivor moved with a very different rhythm. Logan had survived wars, experiments, betrayals, and centuries of violence. The apocalypse did not surprise him. Humanity collapsing under its own mistakes felt familiar. The undead were slower than soldiers, dumber than hunters, and less terrifying than the memories he carried. But they were many, and numbers had a way of testing even the unbreakable. Wolverine moved through ruined subway tunnels and collapsed stations with precision born of experience. He did not waste motion. He did not fight unless necessary. His claws cut through rotting flesh and bone with mechanical certainty, each strike efficient, controlled, and final. The infection could not claim him, but exhaustion was still real. Even regeneration had limits when the world refused to rest. He heard Kong before he saw him. The sound traveled through the city like an earthquake with a heartbeat. Metal screamed, glass exploded, the undead roared in confused response. Wolverine emerged into daylight just in time to witness a skyscraper collapse under Kong's weight. For a brief moment, Logan did not see a monster. He saw something familiar, a creature forced into a war it did not start. The zombies changed the rules of conflict. They were not afraid of Kong's size or Wolverine's blades. They overwhelmed through repetition. When one fell, another took its place. When limbs were torn away, bodies kept crawling. The city itself became a weapon against its former masters, funneling the undead through narrow streets, broken bridges, and fallen buildings where numbers mattered more than strength. Kong adapted the only way a titan could. He stopped swatting and started crushing. Entire swarms disappeared under his fists. He used buildings as clubs, fire as deterrence, and height as advantage. Each movement was instinct refined by survival. But even Kong could not erase an infection embedded in every alley and shadow. The city was too large. The dead were too many. Wolverine understood something Kong could not. This was not a battle to win in open ground. It was a battle of endurance and control. Logan moved where Kong could not, clearing paths, eliminating concentrations, drawing attention away from survivors trapped in unreachable zones. His presence was invisible compared to Kong's, but just as critical. Where Kong reshaped the skyline, Wolverine reshaped survival itself. As the sun dipped behind the smoke-choked horizon, the city revealed its true enemy. Not the zombies, but time. Every hour the undead multiplied. Every hour resources vanished. Fires spread unchecked. Structures weakened. The environment itself turned hostile. Humanity's dominance had been built on fragile systems, and without them, the city began consuming everything inside it. The zombies, drawn by Kong's destruction, surged toward him in catastrophic numbers. For the first time, Kong roared not in dominance, but in frustration. The sound shook windows miles away. Wolverine felt it in his bones. That roar was not rage, it was recognition. The city was no longer prey, it was a trap. Wolverine moved toward Kong not to fight beside him, but to redirect the war. He understood that raw power without strategy would drown in endless bodies. He climbed through wreckage, using fire escapes, broken cables, and collapsing rooftops, until he reached a vantage point where the full scale of the infestation became visible. The city pulsed with movement. It was alive in the wrong way. Below, Kong stood at the center of it all, a living landmark surrounded by death. And for the first time since the apocalypse began, something shifted. The undead were no longer the predators in the city. Power had returned, not in the form of technology or armies, but in beings shaped by survival itself. The real question was no longer whether the city could be saved, it was whether it deserved to be, and whether even monsters like Kong and Wolverine could endure a world that no longer followed the rules of life or death. The city held its breath, unaware that its fate would not be decided by the living or the dead alone, but by the collision of primal force and relentless will. Night fell without ceremony. The sky burned a sickly orange from distant fires, and ash drifted through the air like dying snow. Darkness did not slow the undead, it empowered them. Sound carried farther, panic spread faster. The city became a maze of echoes, and every echo called death closer. At the center of this chaos, King Kong remained standing, his massive silhouette framed against collapsing towers and rolling smoke. Each breath he took stirred the air like a storm, yet even storms could be worn down. The zombies learned, not through intelligence, but through repetition. They piled against Kong's legs, climbed his arms, buried themselves into his fur and wounds. Their bodies tore, snapped, and fell, yet more replaced them instantly. Blood, old and new, soaked the streets beneath him. Kong roared again, swatting hundreds away in a single motion, but the swarm returned, crawling over the fallen, climbing over their own dead to reach him. From above, Wolverine watched the pattern emerge. Kong was being anchored, not restrained by strength, but by mass. The city itself was feeding the undead toward him, using its broken streets and narrow corridors to funnel bodies into an endless tide.
If Kong fell, the city would lose its last visible symbol of resistance, and once that happened, nothing would slow the collapse. Logan moved without hesitation. He descended into the streets, drawing the undead away from Kong by becoming something they could reach. Claws flashed in the firelight as he carved through waves of rotting flesh. He did not fight for spectacle, he fought to create space. Each body he dropped disrupted the flow, buying seconds, then minutes. Time was the most valuable currency left in the city. The undead responded instantly. Hundreds turned toward him, drawn by movement and sound. Wolverine let them come. He backed into a narrow avenue where their numbers meant nothing, where bodies stacked so tightly they could barely move. His claws became barriers, his strikes relentless. Flesh gave way, bones shattered, regeneration fought fatigue as blood sprayed the walls. This was not victory, it was survival at its most brutal. Above him, Kong felt the pressure lessen. He shook himself violently, sending dozens of zombies flying through the air like broken dolls. He seized the opportunity, slamming his fists into the ground and collapsing entire sections of the street, burying thousands beneath rubble. The city screamed as its foundations gave way, but for the first time in hours, silence followed. The pause was brief. The undead never stopped. They simply rerouted. As dawn approached, the infection revealed its true scale. Fires illuminated miles of movement. Entire districts writhed. The city was no longer a place. It was a living organism driven by hunger. Wolverine, bloodied but unbroken, climbed to higher ground, his senses scanning for something worse than zombies. He found it in the silence beyond the city limits. There was no help coming, no evacuation, no cure. This was the final state of things. Kong began to move, not randomly, purposefully. He headed toward the edge of the city, crushing a path forward with deliberate force. He had understood the truth instinctively. This place could not be held. It had to be abandoned. Survival did not mean saving the city. It meant escaping it. The undead followed in catastrophic numbers. Wolverine ran parallel to Kong's path, clearing bottlenecks, collapsing bridges behind them, using fire and debris to slow pursuit. The city resisted every step, as if offended by their attempt to leave. Buildings fell, roads split, the skyline collapsed inward like a dying star. At the final bridge, the last functional artery out of the city, Kong stopped. The structure trembled beneath his weight. Below, the river burned with oil and debris. Behind them, the undead surged in a black tide that filled the streets to the horizon. Wolverine understood immediately what Kong intended. Kong did not roar this time. He moved with calm finality. He stepped onto the bridge and began tearing it apart from its foundations. Steel screamed. Concrete fractured. Wolverine sprinted across as the structure collapsed behind him. The undead fell by the thousands into fire and water, their bodies consumed by the chaos they had created. When the bridge finally gave way, the city was severed from the world. Silence followed. Not peace, but absence, the kind that comes after something has burned itself out. Kong stood on the far shore, wounded, exhausted, alive. Wolverine joined him moments later, his body already healing, his expression unreadable. They did not acknowledge each other. They did not need to. Behind them, the city burned itself into extinction. Fires spread unchecked, structures collapsed into themselves. The undead remained trapped, endless, devouring nothing but ruins. Civilization ended not with a scream, but with containment. As the sun rose, its light fell on two survivors who represented different truths of power. Kong was dominance, raw and undeniable. Wolverine was endurance, relentless and adaptive. Neither could have survived alone. Together, they proved that true power in a fallen world was not about saving what was lost, but knowing when to let it die. The apocalypse did not end that day. It spread elsewhere, silently, patiently. But one city was removed from its path, not by armies, not by technology, but by beings shaped by struggle, forged by survival, and unbound by the illusions that had doomed humanity. And in the ruins of what was once, the world learned a final lesson. When civilization falls, it is not the strongest who rule, nor the smartest who endure. It is those who understand when to fight, when to move, and when to leave everything behind. The city faded into smoke and memory. The monsters walked on.